Okay, we are good. We're live.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission meeting this evening of Monday, February 10th, held online via Zoom. Christina, would you mind taking the roll?
Chair Mitchell,
Here.
Vice Chair Najak.
Here.
Diana Moreno is absent today. Rigby,
Here.
Skinone,
Here.
Sly,
Here.
and Tuing.
Here.
Okay, and Council Liaison is absent as well.
Council's absent. All right, item 3 on the agenda was the city council update, so we'll move past that. Item 4.1, approval of the minutes from our last meeting of January 27th, 2025 that were circulated to us. Does anyone have any revisions or comments to those meetings? If not, do we have a motion?
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes as they are drafted. Want to take a vote, Christina?
No second.
Oh, yep, we need a second.
Well, I second.
Okay, Mitchell,
Yes.
Najak,
Yes.
Rigby,
Yes.
Skinone,
Yes.
Sly,
Yes.
and Tuing. Yes. I couldn't
Jim.
hear it, but is that a yes?
Jim, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, 6 or 6.
And the motion carries and the minutes from January 27th, 2025 are approved. Next on the agenda is item number 5, public comment. Christina, do we have anyone that wishes to provide public comment or raise an issue that's not currently on the agenda?
None signed up.
None signed up? Okay. All right, item number 6 on the agenda, the Commission for Citizen Involvement General Updates. And I think I have a postcard here that I'll read into the record from the Oak Creek Neighborhood Association meeting. Will be held Monday, March 3rd, 2025, from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. at the Oak Creek Elementary Library. Topics will be leaf blowers and learning about the upcoming school bond measure and meeting your neighbors. And that is it for the general updates from the Commission for Citizen Involvement. And I think that brings us into agenda item number 7.1 from our work session. We'll be talking about today the Commission reviewing the Citizen Involvement 2025 work plan. This is work session number 1. And provide direction on the work plan to support the 2025 city council goals and initiatives. And I'll turn it over to Staff Coordinator Erik Olson.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Just wanted to, talk a little bit with the commission now that we do have some goals that are being considered and have been, adopted by council. I think, they still have to adopt the work plans to go along with everything. But for the most part, we're at least in a place where we do have the council goals for 2025. And some of those priorities have changed, but a lot of them are similar. So I think, probably in reviewing this document, you notice that there were some minor changes, notably the inclusion of foothills within the planning commission's work plan for this year and just the planning department's work plan as well, just more broadly. That's the main sort of substantive change here. I think there's a bit more detail than what we've discussed previously. You might remember we met towards the end of last year to discuss some of the commission's sort of major accomplishments from 2024 and some of the key sort of themes and issues that we wanted to address in 2025. So that was a bit of a more, a higher level look at things. So getting into a little bit more of a detailed look at things with this work plan sort of proposal here. So I will go over sort of a high level overview of the accomplishments from 2024. I know that, again, we've kind of taken an overview of those recently. And then I will go into the work plan for 2025, and then we'll kind of discuss whether that looks right or if you have any additional work plan items that you would suggest for us to take a look at this year. So yeah, with that, I'll just kind of get going. Are there any questions before I sort of dive into this stuff? Anything that you wanted to get out of the way before I start talking a little bit more in depth? All right, sounds good. So I will just again talk about kind of what we've been doing throughout the last year. This should be a lot of review, but of course we adopted the housing production strategy as a city late last year. I think that's going to, of course, inform a lot of what we need to accomplish in the 6 years to come. And specifically, there are a lot of projects that we signed up to accomplish within the coming 3 years. So that's kind of, it's a bit front loaded what we agreed to do through the housing production strategy. So that is something that is on, of course, our radar. We were wanting to do a little bit more advanced planning for that earlier this year. I think you might have noticed that the schedule has kind of been adjusted a few times. Basically, the reason for that is we're awaiting input from the state, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, or DLCD. Not only is there a comment period that is open for the public, sort of the statewide, I guess, version of the public at large to provide comment. But there's also sort of an internal DLCD review period where they're going to issue their sort of approval decision and provide potentially some conditions of approval. So that's something that we will be awaiting and isn't expected to be issued until I think it's April 18th is the 120-day deadline that they're working with. So that's kind of the deadline from when we adopted here at the city. So this is all kind of a long way of saying that we have more sort of we need to await their decision before we get into those details. And so that's essentially why I've had to postpone that work session about HPS implementation. So you may have noticed that in the revised schedule. So that impacts a lot of the projects that we're talking about for 2025, but we of course don't want to sort of start getting going too far in the details of a project or even adopt something, which is kind of what we could have done for the fair housing policy project, prior to even hearing from this decision from DLCD. So we're going to wait a little bit on that. Anyway, obviously it's a major accomplishment from last year that's going to continue to, be a part of our work plans moving forward. Citywide parking reform, or the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules, adopting code amendments and comprehensive plan amendments to comply with those is another big piece of work from last year. So finally got that through, and that is currently effective in the city. So that is something that's been in effect citywide for a few weeks now. So something that is already being implemented. And also that relates to the housing production strategy. So I think we already knew that we had made some good progress with that one, but that's at least one strategy we can check off that list. With respect to the variance audit, we had formally adopted kind of within our work plan, we had planned to rather conduct an audit of land use variances within the code and adopt amendments. And that was sort of our way to achieve an exemption from the mandatory land use adjustment requirements of SB 1537. This is something that we talked about throughout the year last year at a number of different planning commission meetings with some updates on the legislative session. We had DLCD come in and talk about this for a little bit last summer. And, I guess ultimately the update to provide there is that it ended up being the case that DLCD did not recommend the city pursue any code amendments prior to the sort of effective date of SB 1537. Essentially, it looks as though the city will likely be eligible for an exemption for most of the sort of variances that we would be required to allow, or these mandatory adjustments. So essentially, we have applied for an exemption regardless of, us adopting any code amendments specifically tailored for that purpose. And that's something that we are currently working to refine, essentially. We are going to have those issued by the end of the month and are essentially on track to have a decision on a similar timeline actually to the HPS. So we should know by sort of mid-April what the decision is from DLCD on our sort of exemption request from SB 1537. So we will have another update on that actually at the same time that we have an update on the HPS implementation, because this is all kind of related to housing production and barriers to housing production. So it's going to be a pretty large and sort of substantive work session there, so it might be a longer one. We also last year adopted amendments to the code, sort of the community development code, as well as other components of the city's code related to the stormwater sort of stormwater requirements. So we amended the stormwater code as well in order to comply with some state requirements from DEQ. So that was another sort of accomplishment from last year that we were able to get done. Primarily sort of were updating and sort of making things consistent within the community development code with the other changes that were primarily within the stormwater code, and just sort of moving some redundant language over to the stormwater code. But nonetheless, that's an important piece of work there. And yeah, I think we had included the tree code update in our work plan for last year. Of course, that's currently still kind of ongoing and in progress. We, of course, have made some progress with that last year with the urban and community forestry plan adoption. Of course, the commission also held a joint work session with the Development Review Commission early last year to talk about that, but really that work is just now kind of starting to pick up again and should, kind of, I'm not exactly sure what the schedule is for this year, but it is anticipated to get going pretty soon. And I think we'll get started within the next few months, probably before summer. So I think Jessica's still finalizing the schedule there, but that will be something that will be a large piece of work for the city, and likely, will involve a number of different amendments. It could be amendments to the community development code, but regardless, it's something that we want to get input from the planning commission on, and there will be, a few different opportunities for the planning commission to be involved with that process, either through, I believe there will be like focus groups for folks to participate in, as well as, again, a lot of this is tentative and to be determined, but I think at least one work session to sort of go over this content. And I think a lot of this is kind of dependent on the results of some of our outreach and engagement with this effort. So it really is kind of TBD what the sort of content of those amendments are and whether they will be to the community development code. So, the extent of the commission's involvement there is kind of dependent on that question. All right, and of course, annual CDC amendments was something that we wanted to accomplish, and we're on track to do so. We've held 2 work sessions on the 2024 annual CDC amendments at this point. The last one was on January 13th, and we tentatively have a public hearing scheduled for March 10th that has now been publicly noticed. So a draft version of those annual code amendments is now available for public review and has been distributed. So that's where we are for our sort of formal work plan from 2024. Other work that we accomplished, though, that is also very important that we just didn't necessarily put on the work plan, was to recognize a new neighborhood association, the Mary's Landing Neighborhood Association, which the Planning Commission, or I guess technically the Commission for Citizen Involvement, sort of recommended city recognition of that neighborhood association to City Council, and City Council sort of concurred and adopted a resolution to provide that recognition on April 16th of last year. Of course, don't want to leave out the NFIP, the sort of national flood insurance program requirements related to the Endangered Species Act measures and the FEMA flood insurance program. Um, that's something that the Planning Commission fulfilled sort of their end of the bargain last year and adopted some code amendments to move that piece of work forward based on the sort of model ordinance that was provided at that point. Since then, there have been some questions about the sort of legality of that that language, the model ordinance, with respect to the state's clear and objective requirements for housing. So, based on some input that we got from some advocates and some sort of folks on the legal side of things, some attorneys, we've decided to await further guidance on that. So that is currently on hold. So essentially, the Planning Commission has adopted, made a tentative or made a recommendation to City Council, but City Council is going to hold off until we have a little bit more information on that front. So anyway, still progress for the Planning Commission, something that's not necessarily going to come back for to the Planning Commission, but it's something that is nonetheless an accomplishment for 2024. And of course, there were, in addition to that, some amendments for the wastewater treatment plant. So, amendments to the comprehensive plan to essentially reflect current plans for a proposed new wastewater treatment facility in the sort of location of the existing Tryon Creek wastewater treatment plant. So, just reflecting that project in the comprehensive plan and updating things accordingly, as well as kind of some larger changes that were required to bring that project forward. So, that was sort of, the bigger chunks of work that we accomplished last year. We received, updates from folks in the city manager's office, or sort of the our legislative side of things. Madison Thiesing came in and spoke about the legislative session last year. We had representatives from DLCD come in to speak about the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis rulemaking. We had staff from engineering talk about the Transportation Systems Plan and Pathways program. And we had our sustainability program manager, Amanda Watson, talk about the city's electric vehicle charging strategy and provide an update on that. So just a broad overview of what we did last year. Probably more thorough than I needed to be for this, but any questions about that before I move forward? All right, thanks for giving me a chance to catch my breath. So yeah, I guess I'll just move on to our proposed work plan for 2025. Before I get into those details, I'll just point out the council goals that were passed, at least, the draft materials that were around when I was able to distribute these materials and have now been sort of adopted more formally. So there is a council goal to plan for change and growth with a focus on enhancing the community's quality of life and sense of place. Pretty similar goal to what we've had in the past, but a little bit of a change of wording. So some sort of minor or subtle changes there to that language. The associated initiatives for this goal are to begin a comprehensive review of the development code to identify barriers to housing production and economic development and implement code amendments to address these barriers. So that's really what we've been referring to as the comprehensive audit of the community development code for housing and for economic development. And you can see that listed on the schedule, the Planning Commission schedule, and of course our proposed work plan, as well as the other initiative to begin implementation of near-term strategies in the Housing Production Strategy Report, including rezoning commercial and mixed-use properties, evaluating a low-income rental tax exemption program, and amending the comprehensive plan to adopt a fair housing policy. So those are kind of the official sort of planning-related initiatives and their related goal. Sort of a new one, or sort of newly applicable to the work of or newly sort of central to the planning department, at least, and within our umbrella, is the council goal and initiative related to foothills. So the goal is just to support business investment and job creation in Lake Oswego. And the associated initiative is to begin the update of the Foothills District Plan and continue to evaluate the Lake Grove Urban Renewal Plan. So um, that is going to be a little bit more of a prominent piece of our work this year than we had envisioned previously. So again, that's kind of the larger change to this document from the last time we went through this late last year. So in terms of the work plan, we've kind of drafted it to reflect that priority. That Foothills District Plan update is a large priority from council. So really, we're getting going on that. We're lifting that to the top of the list here and getting going on that sort of multi-year process. Something that we're hoping to get done by the end of 2027, December 31st, but it's not something that is within the HPS with that date. So it's not necessarily something we've firmly committed a date to, but that is what we're planning on. There will be a lot of different deliverables that we'll get out of this process, but really the biggest one is an updated district plan for that area, as well as kind of amendments to the community development code, comprehensive plan, and other city codes that will be required to actually turn that plan into a reality. So really it'll be kind of one step after the other, the development of the plan, and soon after we'll come directly to the commission to adopt code amendments that are related to the plan. So something to just kind of consider as we're moving forward is I guess really, this is a little bit different than what we've seen before. A lot of times, the work that we've seen, at least at the Planning Commission lately, has been more policy related work. So this will be a lot more, mapping a new zoning district, thinking about, sort of zoning treatments and urban design treatments in those areas. So really have a lot more of a sort of soup to nuts look at things, a lot more of a sort of deep dive into different things that aren't just housing policy. So that should be at least refreshing to folks that are looking to delve into different sort of topics here. Of course, housing is going to continue to be a pretty large focus in, even of that project, but there are, a lot of different issues related to access and infrastructure, particularly in that area, as well as sort of issues with the floodplain and brownfield sites and remediation, things of that nature as well. So a lot of things to discuss with that area. So that's something where we have received a grant from Metro related to that project of approximately $750,000 to do that work. We're just now, late last week, we finalized an agreement, the IGA with Metro. So that's sort of formalize the city's receipt of this grant, and now we're working to put together an RFP essentially. So we're going to be releasing an RFP hopefully early March, and then we'll be discussing a lot of things with both City Council and the Planning Commission starting in sort of late spring, sort of late May, early summer. So a lot more to come on that project, but just wanted to give you a little taste of where things are at with that work and a little bit of what to expect, although like I said, a lot more to come. Also, another large city council goal for this year is the tree code update. So like I said, we're going to start making a lot more progress with that in particular. The UCFP, or Urban and Community Forestry Plan, has now officially been adopted. So this is really the shift over to the tree code. And that's something that we're hoping to accomplish by winter of 2026. And those are the sort of big goals. Other things that we've committed to in the city's adopted housing production strategies and are also high priorities for our work plan are undertaking that comprehensive audit of the community development code to identify barriers both to housing and economic development. The rezoning for housing piece, so it's kind of part one of the larger rezoning strategy. Of course, the Foothills work is kind of a piece of this, but the Foothills work is not just rezoning. Of course, there are a lot of different sort of elements that will be associated with that work. But of course, it is somewhat under that umbrella, but at least this sort of rezoning for housing piece, the non-Foothills elements would be, we're aiming to complete those by the end of 2026. We're also looking at the low-income rental housing tax exemption, um, just kind of considering potentially adopting that program. I'm not sure if we actually made a firm commitment to adopt or I think we just said that we would consider adopting it this year, but that's something that we would like to make a little bit more progress with and do an analysis of and talk about this year. Something that we've committed to again with the housing production strategy. Something that we've talked about recently with the Planning Commission is the fair housing policy and education strategy. And so we, have made some progress there and had Samuel Goldberg from the Fair Housing Council of Oregon come in and present to the commission on that not long ago at our last meeting. So, we still have to, of course, adopt code amendments, or sorry, comprehensive plan amendments rather, that would make affirmatively furthering fair housing a housing policy within our comprehensive plan and do more work related to the educational side of fair housing. But we've at least started some of that work. Um, Additionally, the annual CDC amendments are somewhat related to this as well. But through those, we also look to refine different sort of elements of the code that could be presented as barriers to housing development or economic development as well. So those are sort of the HPS slash code maintenance pieces of work. And then as you've been familiarized with at our last work session, we're also proposing to take on some work related to the home occupation standards, really proposing to amend a portion of sort of sub-criterion within the use specific standards for home occupations to essentially make them more clear and objective, to make them easier to enforce, and sort of make the expectations clearer for both sort of owners of these home occupation businesses, residents that live near them, and code enforcement staff. So that covers the work plan. There's sort of those 8 big items. Obviously didn't have visuals for you or a presentation, but it's outlined pretty clearly in the memo that was distributed. So yeah, I guess that kind of covers what I had for this year for now. Of course, a lot of the schedules and sort of work plans for these individual projects still need to be fleshed out. A lot of that will be a part of that HPS implementation update. So I think with that work session about those different projects, we'll be able to present a high level schedule for each of those individual pieces. But yeah, for the most part, at least we have some sort of deadlines on the books here and a work plan to consider. So yeah, with that, I just want to open up a discussion and talk about, whether you'd propose any changes or additions.
Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate that. I know you had to talk a lot and get through a lot there, but really appreciate the in-depth knowledge. Other folks just chime in. We're on Zoom, so it's a little bit different, but I feel like we should all just chime in. We have questions, and I'll start with mine. I'll jump ahead of the line and just start with my question. At the end of the memo, Eric, it says on the recommendation, accept public comment and provide direction or request additional information. And I just had a question about that public comment part because I assume as we go through each one, we will have to have a hearing and there will be a chance for public comment on each specific task. So I wanted a little bit more to understand is the public commenting on like should these 8 goals be the direction that we pursue based on city council's directives?
Yeah, I mean, the idea was really, that we do have the public comment that we accept at the beginning of this
Okay.
meeting and for folks to come to this meeting and provide public comment if they had any thoughts, which has happened in the past, but, I think we didn't really get anything like that today.
Okay, got it. Makes sense.
But of course, to respond to your other comment, we will have hearings, et cetera, and approval processes for all the other pieces here.
That makes sense. All right. Anyone else? Questions, comments? Go ahead and speak up.
Can you just talk a little bit more about number 6, the fair housing policy and education? What's the education piece of that?
Yeah, it could be pretty large in scope, or it could be more targeted. I think there's a lot of different ways that could look, right? So Um, even just, having this presentation that the Fair Housing Council representative made to the Planning Commission is technically considered education. So I think, our first pass here is actually to think about education for boards and commissions that deal with housing issues. So, working with actually planning staff and development review to potentially provide a similar presentation for the Development Review Commission, DRC. But yeah, I'd say beyond that, there are a lot of basically it needs to be scoped. I guess I don't want to just kind of throw out what it could be because it hasn't been something that we put on pencil to paper yet. That's something that within the HPS it is a longer term strategy. I think so. While we see a lot of benefit getting out there early, it's something that is not something that we're prioritizing in terms of having developed a work plan for that already.
So,
Um, but what it does entail, though, it could be you know sort of outreach to select populations. So they do different outreach to it could be to city council, it could be to real estate professionals, it could be to a variety of different folks, it could be to neighborhood associations, it could be to a variety of different areas related to fair housing. Of course, the city could provide a lot of information, just sort of brochures at the ready at the planning counter or something of that nature. I think some of this is covered in the HPS itself, some of the ideas for what we could do as education, but I think, outreach is a big piece of that, I would say. So, yeah, it could be outreach from staff. It could be sort of outreach that we engage with the Fair Housing Council to do elsewhere in the community. Um, yeah, there are a number of different ways that that could sort of play out.
okay, so it's in a way, it's to multiple target zones, right? It could be city council, so it's just not one size fits all kind of thing.
Definitely. Yeah, I think yeah, I mean there are definitely things that the city could be doing that would reach a large swath of the population, but I think the more targeted outreach has been pretty successful. It seems like based on what we hear from them and the consultants that we worked on for the HPS, or worked with the HPS. So anyway, we need to explore that more to determine what the most appropriate thing would be for this community. But yeah, there are a number of things that we could be doing on the fair housing front that it really it's kind of almost a matter of staff capacity as well, because there's just endless amounts of work that could be done if you really wanted to dedicate the time.
Right, okay. The last question I had was, of the 8 topics, do you have an idea or feeling for how many will be, I'll just say they're outside consultants that are helping on the project?
That's a good question. Let me just kind of go over them quickly. So the Foothills plan, we will be working with a consultant team. Like I said, we've already been issued a grant for that work, so there will be an RFP process that will be beginning in early March. The tree code update, I believe, will also have a consultant, and there's an RFP process that will be, I think, beginning even earlier than that. So that is something we'll definitely have a consultant for. Code audit and amendments, I believe we will also probably both a grant and a consultant for that work. And that's something that will be really pretty large in scope. I mean, it's um, we're looking at the entire plan for a number of different issues related not just to housing, but also economic development. So that's going to be a pretty that's going to require a lot of really intensely detailed look and a lot of even, coaching kind of from staff about what the code is and how it's been interpreted and where to look for things, et cetera. So, yeah, anyway, that will probably have a consultant. Rezoning for housing. We are probably not going to use a consultant as like the core. We're not going to rely on a consultant for a lot of that work, although we are thinking about maybe engaging with a consultant potentially for some help with graphics or community engagement, but it would be a more limited role than we have used them in other projects. At least that's what we're considering now. And yeah, we really haven't thought of using a consultant for additional work. I just mentioned that for sort of fair housing education piece, that could look a lot of different ways, but we definitely haven't, planned or budgeted for a consultant for that work at this point. Um, and yeah, home occupation standards. Yeah, so the rezoning and the home occupation standards will be primarily led by Michael for the most part. So I think, he'll be able to tackle a good amount of that. But, we're going to stretch some resources pretty thin doing a lot of the analysis for the rezoning internally. So, I think we'll have to probably rely a little bit on some outside help for, again, graphics at minimum.
Okay, thanks.
Anytime. Yeah, we're taking on a lot of large and incredibly complex projects. So, I think we're getting more in the business of consultant management than we have in the past. But yeah, we'll be able to, kind of, I think if you were to see the project schedule for Foothills looking into, next year, you'll see that we're going to have a lot of outreach, pretty intense outreach schedule, as well as a lot of planning commission activity, a lot of opportunities for even commission engagement outside of, planning commission meetings. So, yeah, hopefully we'll put them to good use, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Dave. Anyone else?
Oh, I do. I have a question. What, if anything, does the planning commission have to do with the housing production strategy?
Well, we worked as a commission, in large part to guide the development of the housing production strategy, to make recommendations for the strategies that would be included in the housing production strategy, and to, sort of uh, shepherd the projects, I suppose, that are, going to be implemented that do rely on the Planning Commission's involvement. I think a lot of, a good chunk of that work for the housing production strategy would need to come to the commission. At least, the comprehensive audit of the community development code is going to be very much, code amendments that are sort of the, meat and potatoes that we talk about at the Planning Commission on a fairly regular basis, and I think rezoning is another pretty large piece there. So that's going to be, a really big piece of what we'll be talking about in the next couple of years. So the Planning Commission has a pretty central role with the HPS.
Is there an articulated strategy, though? I don't think I've heard anything about that. I know there is a strategy, but is it articulated? What is the goal?
Of the housing production strategy?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's articulated very, very clearly in the document. I think the easiest way to say it is to meet the housing needs that were identified in the housing needs analysis. So that's both sort of production oriented as well as looking at the various different types of housing. So housing that meets the needs of different types of individuals that we found are having trouble finding housing. So meeting the needs of folks with that are looking for accessible units, or meeting the needs of folks that are looking for more family-sized units. Those are, two sort of things that come to mind that were prioritized within the housing production strategy. So, I think there are a lot of sort of, it depends on the strategy. Some strategies are meeting different needs, but broadly, in terms of the document itself, the intent is to meet, those needs that were identified in the HNA. And so we will be kind of judged by that, by the state as well.
Thank you.
Sure. Hoping they don't judge us too harshly. We'll see.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Anyone else? So Eric, from from my perspective, it's on the right path as you've identified and laid out. So we look forward to getting in more detail on each one of the eight categories as they come, which I think we'll cover when we talk about schedule review in a second.
Yes, yeah, that will be very pertinent here. Let me just try to get the schedule up really quick. Um, I will just quickly mention, of course, next week's meeting or I'm sorry, 2 weeks from now, the meeting later this month is canceled. So February 24th, we will not be meeting. That's primarily, well, it's due to a few things, but we really wanted to allow more time for the home occupations project for the survey to be conducted. So to have that be out there for a good number of, a few weeks and get some good responses. And I think when we originally put together the schedule, we had not envisioned necessarily needing to do a survey, or we just hadn't envisioned a survey. So anyway, that's primarily why we had pushed that out. Also, of course, we ended up pushing out those HPS implementation work sessions. So, that's just one thing I wanted to mention. Um, but yeah, so basically, we won't have a meeting on February 24th. Our next meeting after that would be March 10th. On March 10th, we have the hearing for the annual code amendments that we'll be talking about with Evan Franstead. So that will be the sort of large hearing on that work. We'll also, I believe that, oh no, we'll have, yeah, just that hearing that day. I've actually pushed out the next work plan review to the day that we're going to be considering findings. So that would be March 24th. So we don't have to do that on the same day as the hearing. So anyway, that should work out a little bit better schedule wise. So on March 24th, again, we'll have that sort of work plan review number 2. Looks like there won't be too many changes from what we discussed this time around. So that shouldn't be a huge agenda item. The next meeting that we're going to have is on April 14th, and that will be a work session on the home occupation standards. As I mentioned, we're going to allow for a little bit of time to conduct that survey and get a little bit more detailed information based on the guidance that you provided us with at our last meeting. So, I think that should be, I think it's going to be a better project for it. So hopefully we'll have some good data to chat about with you at that point. So yeah, that takes us through to mid-April. And yeah, nothing yet scheduled for the second meeting in April, but a lot of things popping up. So I'm sure we'll have something to populate that with sometime soon. And as I mentioned, that sort of work session on HPS implementation was postponed until May 28th. So that should give us enough time to consider the input and sort of recommendation from DLCD on approval or disapproval. Again, the reason that we decided to push that out was because we have seen some of their letters of approval for other jurisdictions that were conditioned, and the conditions did kind of result in some changes to I'm not sure they're sort of forcing them to change what they're doing so much, but they had implications on the schedule and implications on that might make me second guess wanting to adopt something before we receive that approval at least. So anyway, I think we'll know more, and it's probably going to be different depending on the jurisdiction, but I just wanted to at least be able to kind of process that and change course if necessary. So we can talk about that when the time comes.
Thank you,
And
Eric.
that should be all we need to do in terms of schedule for now. But yeah, a lot of projects to talk about this year, and a lot of them will be discussed on May 28th. So got a lot of work to do before then still.
Okay. Appreciate it, Eric. Thank you so much. Well, that was item 9. Unless there's any other business or comments, we can adjourn. Okay, folks. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate your time this evening, and let's call it adjourned 7:15.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.